And tonight's the second night of our live streams offering a constructive alternative in the 2024 election for all the millions and millions of people who are frustrated by our broken political system. There's a better way to do things, to upgrade the United States to a 21st century collaborative democracy. Now, in order to collaborate on something, we have to agree about what our goals are. And the way that we can do that is through the Constitution. The Constitution is our shared political ancestor. And so we start these meetings off by reciting the preamble to the Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. This is our mission statement as Americans, and the American Union can help us get back to that and offer people a constructive alternative to politics as usual in 2024. So our system is broken. Congress is not looking out for the American people. And so we've got an opportunity to use 21st century technology like we're doing right now to flip this model around, to make politics work for us, to have a country by the people, for the people. You know, the people that the Constitution starts off with, we the people. And when we want to work together to achieve those 5 goals in the Constitution, which I'll talk more about here in just a little bit, what this does is flips the model around, where instead of casting our votes to elect someone and hoping that they keep their campaign promises, which I think we've all seen does not work very well. The American Union model, unionizing as swing voters, flips the model around and comes up with a set of demands first. In 2024, that is the Trump-Biden peace plan. You can find a link below to the legislative package. It's 311 pages spelling out all the changes to the United States Code that can help us end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars. Because our social contract is breaking down. We are not looking out for each other in the way that we should be. And so we're at a time of historical change. This is something that happens every 4 generations in the United States. And we're at that time again. We're at that tipping point where things are going to change. The only question really is how, and what those changes will be and how they will come about. And as we've seen by the recent assassination attempts, that violence is possible. Violence is a possible way that people frustrated with the system might act out in order to try and bring about change. But it doesn't have to be that way. You know, there was a movie that came out recently sort of highlighting what an American Civil War would look like. And, you know, the more that we talk about this option, the more that we talk about what are the ways that Americans could physically fight each other instead of just sort of this verbal online fighting that has really polarized things so much over the last decade and more. What's going on with this video? The more that we talk about the violent options, the more people take them, think about them. And that's why it's important to talk about the nonviolent option, the way to fix our society through cooperation and collaboration instead of compulsion. And so I said America has gone through this before in the past, and that's been the first 3 versions of America. What we've got now is an opportunity to upgrade to America 4.0. Now, the first version, America, came about in 1776 when the with the Declaration of Independence. That was when the 13 colonies said, we quit. We refuse to be part of Great Britain anymore. We're going to do our own thing. And the first government, Articles of Confederation, established a firm league of friendship. It didn't really make them the Union of the United States. They weren't all working together. In fact, a lot of times the colonies and the states in those early days, they worked at cross purposes. They fought amongst themselves. And so in 1787, the framers gathered in Philadelphia and wrote the Constitution. And when it was ratified the following year, that gave us America 1.0. It laid out our framework for government that still pretty much works today. But it had some flaws in it. And part of the reason is because there were compromises, especially over the issue of slavery. And those compromises, they kind of they rattled around for decades and decades until they finally couldn't be ignored any longer. And so in 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected as a Republican president, and Southern states seceded from the Union. I think this is worth pointing out that with each of these iterations of this cycle, where America is reborn like a phoenix. In the Phoenix cycle, there's a new political power that rises. Obviously, at the beginning, it was the framers, the Federalists, who developed the political power in order to see the Constitution ratified. And in the second iteration, America 2.0 came about with the Republican Party. And the Republicans, obviously, they won the Civil War, kept the United States, pulled it back together by force, and resolved the issue of slavery. We abolished chattel slavery in the United States. And the way that we did it really says a lot about us as a nation. No other country on the planet had to fight a civil war in order to abolish slavery. They did it non-violently. But the United States, being founded in the violence of the Revolutionary War, used those same tactics to redefine itself in 1860, 1865. And then, of course, John Wilkes Booth assassinated Abraham Lincoln a week after the Civil War ended, and really changed what that reunification looked like. And so through Reconstruction, the United States again redeveloped itself. And that held together for another 80 years until we had another crisis. This one was an economic crisis in the Great Depression. After the stock market crash in 1929, things got bad, and in 1932, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was elected as president, and with the New Deal. And over the next half dozen years, government reinvented itself again with this new political power. The Democrats brought about a New Deal where America, we looked out for each other in a way that we hadn't before, establishing safety nets, things like Social Security, like a minimum wage, like the FDIC, the insurance for bank accounts, child labor laws, things like that. And we, the country had grown a lot, and we needed to change the way that things functioned. But after another 80 years, another 4 generations had passed, some of those protections in the safety net had either decayed, they'd been repealed, or just the safety net had been stretched so thin that, a net is by definition is full of holes. And so we've got tens of millions of people who are falling through our holes in the safety net. As we'll talk about later, we can fix that. We have the ability in the 21st century to really tighten up the safety net and make sure that our fellow citizens aren't falling through those holes. But once again, this is an opportunity for a new political power to come forward. And the Republicans and the Democrats are so committed to fighting each other. No political party is ever going to get the kind of supermajority that the Democrats had back in 80 years ago. So we need a different way to build consensus. And again, the way that the American Union does this is around those five duties that are in the preamble of the Constitution, reminding Americans of who we are, what we can accomplish by coming together with a shared purpose. I mentioned last night that I wrote a novel trying to lay out this new political paradigm, looking backward from the tricentennial, a timely tale of nonviolent revolution. Again, we are at a time of great change. It does not have to be nonviolent, but the American Union does offer that option, and you can read about it in more details, including more about the Phoenix Cycle in the novel, and see how, from the year 2076, how much better things could be in the United States. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the Constitution before we get into the legislative package. And again, the Constitution, there was a lot of compromises in it. Nobody had really ever done this before, created a framework from government from scratch. Previously, you had, monarchy. You had people who ran the country because their parents had run the country, because their parents had run the country, and it didn't really. This idea of throwing off unresponsive government and forming our own country was a new one. And just as important was the idea that we weren't going to have a king in the United States. Instead, we were going to be a government formed by we the people. And so the framers came up with a whole series of checks and balances, the three branches of government: the executive branch, headed by the president, the legislative branch run by Congress, and the judicial branch, each with checks on each other. However, by the 21st century, that the legislative branch, Congress, has sort of tied itself in knots, and there's only so much it can do that the other branches can do to sort of move things forward without the cooperation of the legislative branch. The Supreme Court is able to write policy sometimes when Congress fails to act. The president is able to issue executive orders, and the executive departments underneath him can also offer some policy. But policy is really the job of Congress. And since they're failing to do it, in the 21st century, we the people, we can do it ourselves. So that's what the Trump-Biden peace plan is: a package of legislation that will set new policy for the United States and put us on a path to ending poverty, mass incarceration, and the endless wars. So those five duties, the legislative package, the Trump-Biden peace plan, is broken down into those five sections for the five duties. Again, establish justice, reforming our criminal justice system, ensuring domestic tranquility, providing for the common defense, promoting the general welfare, and securing the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And you notice out of those five duties that securing the blessings of liberty is the last on the list. That the framers said, first, you have a responsibility to address social problems. Then we worry about and address things for the common good. Then we worry about ourselves. And so we've forgotten about that in America today. When people talk about the Constitution, people often mistakenly think that the Constitution was written to protect our rights. It's not. The Constitution is a framework for government. The framework is about duty. It's about what do we owe each other. Now, after the Constitution was ratified, we passed a series of amendments, the Bill of Rights, and then, as a protection against abuse of authority. But that's not what the Constitution is written for. The Constitution tells us what we're supposed to be doing as a nation. All right, well, let's go ahead and look at this. Again, you can find links in the description below. You can download copy of this, or you can visit our website for for a better description, more detailed description. And I'm going to pull up real quick here the list of the 101 policies, and then we'll talk about some of these sections a little bit more. All right. So Title I, establish justice with police, prison, and prosecutorial reforms. Is the screen share not coming through? Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah. So our first duty is to establish justice, and our judicial system, the whole process has gone terribly wrong in the United States, and so the United States hasn't really passed any major criminal justice reform in quite a long time. Donald Trump made a good good start with the First Step Act in 2018, but that was 6 years ago, and most of the problems that are still there. So it's broken down into the three sections: police reforms, prosecutorial reforms, prison reforms. And so part of it is trying to address the police issues with the police, so those include things training them on their duty to intervene when they see excessive force, establishing a national police misconduct registry, prohibiting law enforcement from using deadly force except as a last resort, making chokeholds and carotid holds a federal civil rights violation, removing qualified immunity for law enforcement officers, including federal agents. And this will help. There's another one that's later on the list, which is repealing the 1033 program that puts military surplus into the hands of law enforcement, puts military surplus on our city streets, and has really contributed to the escalation of the police over the last decades. But what's really contributed to the militarization of the police is the federal drug war. And so, next section of the legislative package repeals and ends the federal war on drugs. This kicks the matter back to the states, allows states to set their own policies the same way that we did with alcohol prohibition during the last iteration of the Phoenix Cycle. That was one of the first things that FDR did as part of the New Deal, was amend and repeal prohibition. And so, as we'll talk about in a couple days, this will opt us out of the UN treaties that bind us to the drug war. It will create a FDA framework and put a tax on the sale of recreational drugs, and use that tax to fund services to reduce the harms that drugs cause, including offering treatment to anyone who wants it. Some of the other prosecutorial reforms include striking mandatory minimums from the United States Code, ending the use of cash bail, restricting the use of no-knock warrants, and ending civil asset forfeiture. One of the other ways that will help protect and advance justice in our court system is by establishing a voucher system, so that anyone arrested has the opportunity to get legal advice, legal counsel, much sooner. Right now, again, especially with cash bail, people are often held without access to basic legal knowledge, and it creates a huge imbalance of power. So by giving people a way to get access to that legal knowledge, funded by a tax on lawyers, we'll be advancing our goal of establishing justice. The last section of Title I deals with prisons. And the United States has the largest prison population in the world. We're no longer number one per capita. Countries like El Salvador has bumped us from that top spot, which is good. And also our prison population has come down slightly. I shouldn't say what El Salvador is doing is good necessarily, but and so as part of this nonviolent revolution, we really focus on humanizing, really focus on finding the humanity in people, and that includes incarcerated Americans. More technical difficulty. So we're going to improve the treatment of incarcerated Americans, repeal some of the restrictions on their access to Pell Grants, since education is a proven way to reduce recidivism, making sure that people who do leave prison, 97% of people are supposed to get out, to be released at some point, make sure they have ID documents, restrict the use of for-profit prisons, and restore some of the due process habeas hearings that the Supreme Court has knocked down in the last couple of years. This also includes reforms for solitary confinement. The United States is an outlier in civilized nations, industrialized nations, in the way that we treat our incarcerated people. And we're going to start meeting the United Nations standards for solitary confinement. All right, Title II is ensuring domestic tranquility with a 10-year truce on guns and abortion. This is the way that Republicans and Democrats, they keep us divided through these wedge issues. It's often said that most Americans are independents that don't really consider themselves as one of the major parties. However, thanks to these wedge issues, almost everyone has a leaning towards one of the major parties, because these issues are designed to be so polarizing, and as to force people to pick a side. That is their intention, because once you wedge people apart, it's hard to pull them back. It's hard to switch sides once you've been wedged apart. And so rather than demonizing each other, trying to persuade people to switch sides, let's just take the wedge out. Let's just address the root causes. And so that's what Title II does. It offers a middle ground that, with policies supported by a majority of the population, and locks those in place for 10 years and says, look, we're gonna let these things percolate for a decade, see how they work and just take this idea of fighting off the table for 10 years. As you can see there, that sort of includes restoring Roe v. Wade and establishing universal background checks for gun sales, banning bump stocks, and like I said, banning any further restrictions on guns and abortion for 10 years. All right, Title III. This is provide for common defense. As I talked about last night, we have far exceeded the framers' mandate and their goal of not having standing armies. And so Title III really has two sections. One of them is reducing our global military footprint. And we've got hundreds and hundreds of foreign military bases. We're going to close this would close some of those by holding local referendums to see if the people there actually want our military bases. And if they don't, we'd go ahead and leave. We'll reduce our military budget by a third by fiscal year 2029, and repeal those blank checks for the endless wars, the authorizations for military force from 2001 and 2002. Second part is improving our moral standing in the world. And so these are some of the policy decisions that would do so. We would join most of the rest of the planet in banning landmines. We would work to become a force for peace, build on the work Donald Trump did with North Korea, and use that to finally formally try and formally end the Korean War after, it was more than 70 years ago that we stopped fighting, but there's still it's still a fertile ground for conflict, and it's time to go ahead and put an end to that. When it comes to nuclear weapons, again, the United States has the opportunity to lead by example. We're the only nation that's ever used nuclear weapons in war, and we can follow China's lead to adopt an unconditional no first use policy for nuclear weapons. Say that we will never be the first to launch. In addition, we can reduce our nuclear stockpile. Most of our nuclear stockpile is sitting in storage anyway, but by reducing it, we can help. It will reduce the pressure of other nations like China to feel a need to keep up with the United States and Russia. The United States and Russia currently have about 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. So by reducing, not disarming ourselves, reducing our stockpile, we can lead by example and lead by example in reducing the odds of nuclear war. Two other things, closing Guantanamo Bay military prison. We're down to just a couple dozen prisoners there. 750 have been incarcerated and released without charges over the decades, but we've still got more than a dozen men there who are being held without charges, some of them for as long as 2 decades. And it's really a moral stain on our nation. So we would close Guantanamo Bay and prohibit the development or acquisition of lethal autonomous weapons, killer robots, and the use of and the use of economic sanctions against countries, civilian populations in countries, the way that we've done with Cuba. We'll talk about that more in a few days. All right, Title IV is promote the general welfare. Now, welfare has a very specific definition. It means health, happiness, prosperity. These are the things that the Constitution says we should be promoting. And the framers, just to make sure there was no misunderstanding, in Article 1, Section 8, said that Congress shall provide for the general welfare. Now, when we've got 130 million Americans who are living in or near poverty, when we have hundreds of thousands of people who go bankrupt because of medical costs each year, we're not promoting health, happiness, and prosperity. Wealth inequality as well is so exacerbated in this country again that we're living in a second Gilded Age. And so Title IV will address these issues, not to level the playing field, but to turn that safety net, which is failing so many people, into a safety floor. So the first part is healthcare reform. The Trump-Biden peace plan would establish that public option that Joe Biden campaigned on 4 years ago. It would help us decouple health insurance and employment. So you'd have the freedom to leave your job. 1 in 6 Americans right now is staying in their job because of health insurance, and we can change that policy like most other countries do. And other reforms include more negotiation over drug prices, some restrictions on pharmacy benefit managers who are also contributing to the high cost of prescription drugs. We'll establish paid family leave. The United States is one of the only countries on the planet that does not require paid time off for new mothers. And as a result, far too many of them go back to work almost immediately, which drives up our infant mortality rate. I don't know how you can say we're promoting the general welfare of the country when we allow thousands and thousands of babies to needlessly die because economic pressures forced their mothers back to work. We're not looking out for those children. We're gonna also try and increase the supply of doctors so that and so there's a couple of small programs in here to do that. The next section is establishing unconditional basic income. Unconditional basic income, again, would be that safety floor that no American could fall beneath. It's that at $16,800 a year for adults, plus a third of that, $5,600 a year for kids. And that's enough to lift every American family up above the poverty line, and again ensure that none of them fall below that. From there, once on that safety floor, you can use capitalism to go as high as you want, but there's no reason in the wealthiest country in the world that we should be allowing 10 million, 12 million children to live in poverty. We can do better. Part of this is part of UBI is fixing our monetary system, having the U.S. Treasury take over issuing money through a digital legal tender, Treasury dollar bills. We'll spend the night talking more about how that'll work. Some of the other things that will address poverty are people on supplemental security income have very low thresholds. They're not allowed to have more than $2,000 in assets, or they can be retroactively penalized for any assistance that they've received. We're going to raise those limits that purposely trap people in poverty up to the annual UBI amount. And some of the other things to promote the general welfare, authorizing postal banking, like, and 93% of the world's postal services do this. And then to address some of the wealth inequality and as a clawback for unconditional basic income, there's a value added tax, 12%. And we'll talk about in another minute some of the other two clawbacks for that. All right, now after we've promoted the general welfare and promoted the general welfare and provided for the common defense and ensured domestic tranquility and established justice, now we secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And so this is this has some new items in it this year as compared to the previous legislative package in 2022. But first and foremost is establishing universal suffrage in all federal elections. We talked about how this is America. This would be America 4.0, this fourth iteration of the Phoenix cycle. And when in the 18th century, the United States allowed white men to vote. In the 19th century, we allowed black men to vote as well. In the 20th century, we allowed women to vote. But we still have millions and millions of people who are disenfranchised and not able to vote. And so we can fix that with universal suffrage and make sure that we do have a government by the people, for the people. When it comes to Social Security, there's a lot of fear mongering about that. There's a cap on how much people pay into it, and this legislation would protect Social Security by raising the cap to increase the contributions that are going into that trust fund. Some of the other dysfunctional things that Congress does is if Congress fails to pass a budget, and they almost always do, it shuts down large chunks of the government, which is silly. No other country does this, and so we're going to put an end to that with continuing resolutions and showdowns over the debt ceiling, address a couple of the recent Supreme Court decisions on immigration, finally passed the DREAM Act, create a path to citizen for those who came here, were brought here illegally as children, as well as offer a path to citizenship for immigrants who have been here more than 10 years. And and have a permanent electronic employment verification system that large employers would be required to use to ensure that the people that they are hiring to work are eligible to work in the United States, and as well as 19.2 billion for border security and immigration courts. The last two big policies for protecting the environment, the ensuring securing the blessings of liberty for our posterity, is carbon fee and the plastic fee, two pollutants that are having a big impact on our planet and its future. And so by taxing pollution so that the cost of the pollution shows up in the price of the products that we buy, will create a financial incentive to pollute less. And by coupling this with unconditional basic income, everybody will be compensated essentially for their share of the pollution. People who pollute less than average come out ahead. People who pollute more than average pay into the system. And so those are the 101 policies. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to put them into the chat. And we'll be talking about all of these policies in depth over the next 3 weeks, breaking down how exactly we do all of these things. Again, this is what makes the American Union different than traditional political parties, traditional candidates who run and offer nebulous sound bites. Say things like, I want to fix healthcare. I want to save Social Security. Okay, how? And by developing consensus around solutions before the election, we don't need to fight over the election if we can all agree on what should be done. You know, elections are inherently an adversarial process that we fight. Republicans and Democrats fight each other. And the theory was, well, okay, the best ideas will win the battle, and those will trickle through into policy. But it hasn't worked out that way in practice. Instead, Republicans and Democrats have just been so enmeshed in fighting each other. And that's really their whole reason for their existence these days, is to fight each other and to raise money to fight the other party. This is not productive for the United States. We need a new political power. We need a third way of doing things. But a third way of doing things doesn't have to be a political party. We need a new philosophy. So we can use principles of nonviolence, which we'll talk about more in a future stream. The principles of nonviolence that Martin Luther King laid out, and 21st century technology like Zoom, where we don't all have to sit in one room in Washington, D.C. to work out these kind of deals. A People's Legislative Assembly can meet virtually, bring people together from all across the country, and work out the legislation that we want to collectively bargain for. I know a lot of people aren't interested in the nuts and bolts of how exactly the legislative process works. I told you last night I served 3 terms in the state legislature, and it was interesting, but it's definitely not for everybody. But this is how a union works, right? You don't have to have every single member of a union coming, negotiating on every single point. You have a committee that does the negotiation and then presents its proposed new contract to the workers to see if they'll support it and ratify it. And so the People's Legislative Assembly has put together this legislative package, with members having the opportunity to submit their ideas for exploration and consideration. And now we've got a set of demands for Congress: incumbents versus challengers. Incumbents can get this done before the election. They can keep their jobs with the American Union endorsement. If they refuse, we can kick them out of office, kick them out of power. And so over the next 3 weeks, I'll be asking you to contact, if you want to end poverty, end mass incarceration, end the endless wars, I'll be asking you to contact your members of Congress and let them know that you expect them to act next month before the election to enact the Trump-Biden peace plan. I guess we can just talk about, so the name, obviously, that Joe Biden is no longer running for president, but he is still the president of the United States. He is the highest ranking Democrat, and Donald Trump is the candidate for president on the Republican side. And so these two men, as leaders of their political parties, have the opportunity to make peace. And I know, yeah, they have the opportunity to make peace. There's nothing stopping them from working out a deal. What we have to do is persuade them that it's in their best interest to work out a deal instead of fighting. And so the way that we do that is by breaking the polls. We looked at the polls yesterday, and that sliver of undecided voters in all the battleground states and nationwide that are stopping Republicans and Democrats from having more than 50%, from getting more than 50% support, and saying and telling the pollsters that we're going to vote with the American Union on November 5th, that we are true swing voters, willing to vote for both Republicans and Democrats, and whichever of those candidates gets the American Union endorsement, that's who we'll be voting for. Pollsters love to ask, are you leaning towards one or the other? And look, we probably all are. We probably think that one of those two candidates is the lesser of two evils, and there's definitely some truth to that. But we're not gonna change the way that the system works. We're not gonna make the system work for us by playing by the old rules. Instead, we use the principles of nonviolence and refuse to fight. You know, one of the aspects of nonviolence that Dr. King spoke and wrote on very eloquently is seeing the best, seeing the potential in each and every human being, and being willing to come at them with love, and seeing all that they have the capabilities to be. So Republicans and Democrats try and persuade us how terrible the other side is, how immoral, how deplorable, how necessary it is that they be defeated as an act of morality. Well, the real act of morality, the real thing to do here is to approach the other side with love, and to try and help people accomplish things, to help them be all that they can be, and to help them generate the political will, the political power to upgrade our social contract by enacting the Trump-Biden peace plan before the November election. So we've got a specific timetable for this. I'll be continuing these live streams through October 15th. And October 15th, as we talked about last night, all Americans are invited to join a 24-hour fast for peace. And that fast for peace is simple. It's 24 hours with water only. And as part of my own commitment, I am on day 2 of a 24-day fast. No food. On that last day, it'll be nothing but water. And if you want to stage a nonviolent revolution, if you want to end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars, I invite you to join me in the fast for peace for 24 hours on the 24th day. I know this idea of group fasts is sort of not a real 21st century thing in America. We have a culture of consumption, a culture of greed, culture of instant gratification, and so fasting is an important part of this nonviolent revolution in that it works to change the culture. These group fasts give us an opportunity to practice delayed gratification. They give us an opportunity to willingly give something up. And group fasts have a very old history in America. Even before we were the United States, when after the Boston Tea Party, the British blockaded Boston Harbor and cut the city off. Thomas Jefferson down in Virginia, he authored a resolution calling on the people of Virginia to observe a day of fasting on, I believe, June 1st, 1774. And they did. They needed a way to stand in solidarity with the patriots in Massachusetts, in Boston. And so that was the form that they did. George Washington participated, many others in Virginia as well, as a way of two aspects. One is seizing the moral high ground, and two, as a way of petitioning through that sacrifice, petitioning Parliament, and trying to say, look, we're willing to suffer for what we believe in. We want to inspire your conscience, your wisdom, your reflection, to rethink your actions. And that really is an essential part of this. Thomas Jefferson was, one of the first to use national days of fasting in the United States, or it was really a state level thing for him. But George Washington, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, as when they were president, they also used national days of fasting as a way of drawing the American people together through a shared experience. And it was only many, many years later that the founding father of India, Mohandas Gandhi, began using national days of fasting to bring his people together. The British, when they occupied India, they kept people divided there too, the same way our political system does. They kept the Muslims and the Hindus divided and encouraged them to fight against each other. But Gandhi used a national day of fasting to unite them, to bring them together in 1919. And when he did, he said, no country has ever risen, no nation has ever been made without sacrifice. And we are trying an experiment of building ourselves up by self-sacrifice without resorting to violence in any shape or form. This is Satyagraha. Satyagraha is the tactic, the technique that he developed of nonviolent action, of trying to convert an opponent with love instead of trying to defeat them. And again, the United States today is so evenly matched between Republicans and Democrats. One side is never going to defeat the other. We're always going to have a two-party system. And so we're locked into this perpetual warfare. And it's not doing our country any good. It's not doing our country any good. So we need a new way forward. And the way forward is, instead of fighting, trying to convert both sides and get them onto the same page. That same page is the preamble to the Constitution. Well, rather than to inspire our fellow Americans about what we could be, what we could accomplish by working together, how we could end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars. You might recognize those three things as being the triple evils that Dr. King identified of poverty, racism, and militarism. He pointed them out back in the 1960s. They still need to be addressed today. Poverty especially, as we'll talk about in the coming weeks, fixing our monetary system. Our monetary system is designed to exacerbate wealth inequality, which leads to more social disruption and less social cohesion. And so by fixing one of the basic building blocks of our society, we'll have the foundation for building a better future, so that when the tricentennial does roll around, the United States has stayed together. That after 300 years, the United States is thriving. That the United States looks out for each and every one of us, and we look out for each other just as a matter of normal practice, making sure that people are taken care of. All right, let me check the chat, see if there's any questions there. As I said, I am on a 24-day fast to invite people to join me on the last day for 24 hours. Why 24 hours? Or I'm sorry, why 24 days? And there's a couple of reasons. One of them is that was sort of how the math worked out from the International Day of Peace yesterday to October 15th. Is 24 days. But there's two other good reasons. One of them is Cesar Chavez. Cesar Chavez, as you probably know, was a union organizer in California. He organized the United Farm Workers, and he struggled for many years to get them in a negotiating position where they could negotiate with with the farmers, with the growers, to get better contracts for their members. But during some of those fights, during some of those strikes, some union members resorted to violence. And so in 1968, Cesar Chavez began a fast on February 15th as a way of rededicating the United Farm Workers to nonviolence. And that his fast he fasted for 24 days to commit the movement to nonviolent social change, not to pressure them into anything, but to persuade them with love that what the heck was going on with this thing? But to persuade them with love that nonviolence was the best way to bring about change. Earlier in the 20th century, Gandhi set off on one of his most famous acts of civil disobedience, the Salt March. On March 12th, 1930, he set out from his ashram, his community where he lived, and spent 24 days marching to the sea, telling the British and everyone else who would listen on the way that he was going to commit civil disobedience. He was going to break the salt laws. The British had a monopoly on the production and sale of salt and taxed it. Telling everyone that he was going to break the salt laws and commit civil disobedience. And so for 24 days, that pressure built up. Everyone waited to see what would happen after the march was over when Gandhi arrived at the sea. And so over the next 24 days, 23 days now, I'm going to create the similar pressure. What's going to happen on October 15th? Do Americans want to work together to solve our problems? Or do people want to fight? And having talked to many, many people, I can tell you there are definitely some that want to fight, but the vast majority of people want to see problems solved. They want to live in a society that functions, a society where we don't have homeless encampments in our cities, where we don't have panhandlers on every corner, where people are thriving, where they're not worried about how they're going to pay their rent or feed their families. This is a normal human thing to want to work together, to collaborate, to solve problems. And it's one of the things that has allowed us to accomplish so much as a species over the last, over thousands of years. And we're now at a point in human history where we can do more for each other than ever before. And so the American Union offers this opportunity for the American people to come together, to share in this self-sacrifice, to demonstrate that we're all willing to give something up. Because as I went through the overview of the Trump-Biden peace plan tonight, you may have seen something that you didn't like. I know I did. There are provisions in there that I'm not a big fan of, but I recognize that they represent legitimate concerns of other Americans. And so I'm willing to give up something. I'm willing to compromise on those issues in order to get a whole package with lots of things that I do like. And so by each of us being willing to compromise, give something up, we can all come out ahead. That is the power of a union. That is the power of a fast as a way to demonstrate our willingness to give something up. So I started my fast at 205 pounds. Today I'm at 201, and I'll keep you updated. I've taken my electrolytes, and I anticipate being in good health through this process. But if it's possible for me to go 24 days without food, it's possible for you to give up food for 24 hours. If you want to change America and the way that politics works, you have the power to be part of the solution. I hope you'll join me tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern to learn more about some of the specifics in Trump-Biden peace plan. And as always, if you have any questions, visit our website, anamericanunion.com.